Hey folks, welcome to Pontification Nation. My name is David Pryor and I'm here with...
Dallin Wilson.
And today we're going to be discussing The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho in 1988. We're going to tell you a little bit about the author before we get into the synopsis and our feelings about the book. This man had a very interesting story.
Very interesting life.
Yeah, to say the least. Paulo Coelho was born to a conservative Catholic family in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil in 1947. As a child, he hated the rigid lifestyle of the church and his family. His family was so conservative that they very early on crushed any dreams he may have had of being a writer. As a teenager, like most of us, he began drinking heavily, staying out late, and at the age of 16, his parents had him committed to a psychiatric facility for the mentally disturbed. I mean, imagine that.
Just because he's out drinking with his friends and maybe behaving badly at home.
Yeah, maybe a little too aggressive, but
that's intense.
You know, you're born into a strict Catholic family. I mean, that's we can all relate to that to some extent. They had him committed to a psychiatric facility, and get this. For 20 days, he was on high doses of psychiatric drugs and given electroshock therapy. He was 16, so this was in the early 60s.
Wow.
Yeah, and as you would have guessed, this only exacerbated the behavioral problems he had with with everybody, but with society, but towards his parents, I assume. He was eventually released, but the pattern of societal aggression followed by involuntary psychiatric commitment continued. It was just like, I think he was in there three times total. As an adult, though, he finally moved out and decided to create his own life and joined the counterculture of Brazil. This was again in the 60s, so the hippie movement was going on. It was very alive and well down there. But because of that, he became a songwriter for a man who was very famous. He was a songwriter and was eventually arrested because they were speaking out against the tyrannical government of Brazil at the time. And he was not only arrested, but he was tortured. And while he was in prison, he started... I'm going to use the word torture, and he started torturing himself. And when I use the word torturing in that sentence, I'm going to use air quotes around it. He was torturing himself by scratching himself and drawing blood across his chest. And he was claiming that he was psychotic. And he was using as evidence of him being psychotic his past experiences in a psychiatric hospital. We're going to get to the book in a minute, but I thought that was kind of if God gives you something, that's an interesting little piece of information or something negative that you can use in your favor later in life.
And well, in the end, he was able to use it to get out of trouble. They let him go.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I don't know if that would be the case nowadays. I heard that's a bad idea to claim that you're insane nowadays. Even if you have the information to back it up, I heard that in a typical prison system, as bad as it is, the mental ward is worse.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, because I think you and I both could fall back on that plea, given the right.
I've thought about it.
The right circumstances. But I don't know if that's a good idea nowadays or not. Maybe.
Well, for him
it worked out well for him.
In the tyrannical Brazilian government
Yes.
that existed at the time, it proved victorious for this man. And when he got out, he eventually decided he was tired of the crazy, alcohol-fueled life and decided to settle down, even having a traditional Catholic wedding with his wife. He's been married twice now. He's with his second wife. As far as I understand, he's still with his second wife. And he never gave up on his dream of being a writer. And he finally published his second and most famous book, The Alchemist, in 1988. One other tidbit I'd like to point out before talking about The Alchemist is that one little tidbit of information is that he. I'm not drawing this from my notes. I saw this briefly in like a small documentary I saw about him earlier. He went to the Holocaust Museum with I believe it was his first wife, and met a man that said something very cryptic to him. Said, "I'm going to see you at some point in the future." He saw this man later in life in Amsterdam at a coffee shop, and this man has been his spiritual guide until today.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? Neither you nor I are here to.
Maybe we should start doing that and just start talking around to people. It's like, I'll see you one day in the future.
Yeah.
And then, as long as you see one, you could take him under your wing and start scamming him for money.
I've been told I have a pretty basic white boy face.
Yeah.
I could maybe pull that off, and then later on,
Me too.
Who knows?
Crazy.
Yeah. So The Alchemist, published in 1988, was originally a failure. It sold 900 copies.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a massive failure.
That's crazy because it's sold over 50 million now.
Well, the reasoning for that is, his original publisher dropped it after only selling 900 copies. But again, we'll get to the meaning of the book. But he did believe that he was living his own metaphor, basically, and
he was living his own personal legend.
Yeah, and so his original publisher dropped him, but miraculously he found a second publisher who was able to translate the book into English, and found success, which is what brings us here today.
Yes, to The Alchemist. I guess it's time for the synopsis.
Yeah, let's go to that.
There's not a lot of detail in this book. It's almost like a parable, and I want to mention this real quickly.
It's like a myth.
It's like modern day scripture, man. It's like he's writing verses. It's so simple, and it's about the lessons that you learn from it, not the storyline. So I will go through the storyline, and then we're gonna spend some time talking about the themes and what he wanted. I think what he wanted you to learn, because it really feels as if he's putting across this information in the form of a story to teach the audience something. And in this case, it's following your own personal legend and or your destiny, following your dreams to fulfill your destiny. So the story is about Santiago. He's a young Spanish shepherd living in Spain and quite successful at his craft. Knows his sheep well and does well with them. But he's been having this recurring dream. And he has this dream every time he lays and he sleeps beneath this old tree, a sycamore tree that grows through the ruins of an old church near the fields where he takes his sheep to feed. And in the dream, a child comes to him and shows him the pyramids and tells him that this is where you'll find your treasure. You need to go to the Great Pyramids to find a treasure.
The Great Pyramids of Egypt.
Yeah, the Great Pyramids. But
as opposed to the one in Las Vegas.
And yeah, not the Luxor. But this was I don't know when this book is set, but it's in the past.
Yeah, it's in the past. It's I don't think it's too far in the past, does it?
No, but it's in a remote area. Regardless, it's not. I don't know if he really gets into the timing. I would say early 19th century. I think maybe.
Yeah, that sounds about right. We'll go with that.
Or 20th. Somewhere between 18 and 1900. Because it's still fairly primitive there. So after he has this dream, he's troubled by it because he wants to. Everything is going well. He wants to stay, have his sheep. He's thinking about proposing to a merchant's daughter who has caught his eye. And he almost decides to do that, but decides to go to a gypsy, have his dream interpreted, and she tells him to go to Egypt, and that is where he will find the Great Pyramids and his treasure. She also, as a side note, demands 10% of his treasure when he finds it. So he
Well, she words it as 1/10.
1/10, yeah. Perhaps another part of the allegory.
Yeah, where do we hear 1/10? Where does somebody else?
Well, that's what God demands of His children as a tithe.
Requests, yeah.
Yeah. So after he meets, or after he has his dream interpreted, he meets this mysterious man, and he calls himself the King of Salem. He's wearing a strange golden breastplate, and it just kind of seems really mystical. Tells him that he must follow his own personal legend by learning to speak the language of the world, and that he should go to Egypt and listen to the gypsy and to find his treasure. And that's what convinces Santiago to go. The King of Salem, as you later find out, he goes by Melchizedek as well, who isn't like one of the highest ranking angels in heaven. I don't know if he's supposed to actually be like an angel helping him out.
I think he is.
Yeah. So I mean, he's wearing a golden breastplate, and he gives him the Urim and Thummim, which I suppose is.
Now hold on. Who is that angel biblically?
So Melchizedek is one of the he's one of the highest ranking angels in heaven. So people talk about Michael as being like the archangel's heaven, but Melchizedek is like second in command. He goes by another name, Metatron. If you're into sacred geometry, Metatron's cube is supposedly his symbol. So really, really interesting. Something I'm super interested in. I have a tattoo of it on my body. So I was interested in it because
you have it on your chest.
I do, right on my chest, and it supposedly acts as a. I could talk about this for a long time, but sacred geometry, Metatron's cube supposedly acts as a like an amulet, and it's his symbol, but it really is a map of creation, and it has all the Platonic solids within the form, and you can make any form in the universe using the lines in this 2D object that's a representation of a 3D object. Anyway.
So that's who he meets.
He meets one of the highest ranking angels of heaven, and he gives him.
But he doesn't know that's who it is.
No, it's just some strange man who gives him these two stones,
and they're called
the Urim and Thummim. And this is
those are biblical as well.
Yep, and this is the only form of divination approved by God in the Bible. And basically, what you would do is put them in a bag, ask a question, and pull out either the white stone or the black stone. And one meant yes and one meant no. You'd ask very clear questions, and it was sort of a way of, divining, asking deliberate questions of God. So he has these gifts. He doesn't know what they are, but he's intrigued enough by him to sell all of his flock. He also demands payment. The King of Salem demands payment for his services, for giving him the stones and for telling him to go, basically. He demands half?
No.
I don't remember.
Seriously? He demands 1/10.
Okay, another 10th. I don't know.
He demands 1/10.
Another 10th. So, Santiago agrees. Seems to me like he's kind of naive at this point, but he also tells him to stop promising his future what he doesn't have yet to people. So
don't promise what you don't have yet.
Yeah, so just lessons and metaphors and all over the book. After this, he listens and he sells all of his sheep for a ticket across the sea from Spain to I guess Morocco, but he arrives there and he's promptly robbed of all of his money. He just gives the guy the money. He tells him, "Oh, you better give that to me. I'll keep it safe for you.
Yeah.
Let me guide you through the town. The city can be dangerous." Some commotion happens, and he's staring down, and he just knows when he looks up, his friend's gonna be gone. He already knows it. So he's destitute, and he's forced to find work. And then he does find work in a crystal shop. He spends about a year in the crystal shop helping the crystal merchant make money and trying to convince him to go on his own personal legend, which is
Well, in the crystal, the merchant is very. He's like the stereotypical sort of older businessman who
doesn't like change.
Doesn't like change. He's lived his life. He's a Muslim man.
Devout Muslim.
He's a devout Muslim man who. I have never read the Quran, but apparently the Quran demands that. I never read the Quran in full, I'll say, but he says in the Quran apparently Allah demands that one thing that you should do throughout your life as a Muslim is make a pilgrimage to Mecca, and this man, this crystal merchant, has, you know, his thing in life. His big goal in life is that he wants to make that pilgrimage to Mecca, but he feels like the dream of it is better than the actual destination
he says,
would be.
I'll never actually go. I'd rather just think about it.
Yeah, he feels like it would just be anticlimactic, so to speak.
But he does teach him a lot, also, the old man, and
sure.
he learns a lot from him. He transforms his business into an old dusty glassware shop to like a thriving business model. He starts selling tea in the crystal glasses at the top of this hill. Anyway, he's able to turn this shop into a very successful business, and he makes enough money to, at this point, he's given up on his dream. He wants to buy more sheep and go home because he was, so put off by being robbed. In the end, he meets somebody else, another strange random character who just reminds him of the King of Salem, and he basically says again, you need to go, and he does. He
excuse me.
Yeah, he's able to buy his way to the pyramids in the form of a ticket on a caravan.
Yeah,
that's the next leg of the story. They cross the Sahara. It's the Sahara, so it's a big deal. And in the crossing, he meets
a small little stretch of land.
Yeah, he meets this Englishman, who I thought at first would be the alchemist because he studies alchemy, but he's searching for this mysterious man named the alchemist. So through their caravan travels, they are stopped by some tribal wars that are happening in the area, and they can't go on because it's not safe. And it just escalates, I guess, to the point where they're kind of trapped there. And he spends months there. He meets a girl, falls in love with her, right away. Very romantically, too.
And you read that and you're kind of like, and he meets her. They have this explanation that she says all the right things. He said, it's almost. It reminds me of Braveheart, actually. Like when William Wallace falls in love, or immediately he's like, "I love you. I've always loved you."
Yeah,
it's like what?
Yeah,
but that's
but that goes along with the theme of the book.
It goes along with the theme of the book, and it's kind of a traditional way to do it too.
Right.
I mean, love is a very different thing now. Where you, in fact, you know what? In the book, it actually says that it comments on that for a minute. It says that there's one way to fall in love, which is you learn to love somebody basically, and like and then there's the other way where you just love at first sight.
And what he's saying is like his whole life had led him up to this point, that this was all part of his personal legend, and that's his whole thing throughout this trip. Is he's learning to speak and listen to the language of the world, he calls it. And at first he starts out actually already sort of speaking it because he's learned so much from his sheep and from the land and from nature, and he just sort of talks about meeting Fatima as part of this whole thing.
That's his love.
The love from the desert woman.
I read it as Fatima.
Sure.
Fatima. Sure. Whatever.
I think it's Fatima.
Yeah, whatever.
Because it's still a name.
F-A-T-I-
it's still a pretty popular. It's like an Indian. I think it's an Indian name.
Fatima.
Yeah.
she's part of the oasis in the middle of this desert.
She's a desert woman, so she understands. She often the women there send their men out, and they die in battle, or they don't come back, or maybe they do. Her dad leaves and comes back, so she's okay with him. She convinces him to keep going because again, he wants to stay. He wants to stay with Fatima. Now he's a successful man. He's wealthy from his business with the crystal merchant, and he thinks he's found his treasure already in the form of Fatima. But he meets the alchemist. And the alchemist is this not at all what I expected. He rides up.
Yeah. Let's talk about when he meets him.
Because this is a cool scene. He rides up on this horse, and you've actually seen him in the distance from the caravan. He's sort of following the caravan the whole time, and you don't really understand what he's doing. He has these falcons, and Santiago reads these falcons in flight. They're fighting, and he has a vision that the oasis, which is a neutral territory, is going to be attacked.
There's tribal war going on among the local government, for lack of a better word. There's local governments that are at wartime, and in this desert area, in the oasis that they find is a neutral zone where they are not allowed to attack through the rules of war. Which, when people say the rules of war, that always makes me laugh.
But it's tradition. Tradition has been it's been upheld for a long time, so it's sort of unheard of that it would be attacked. And Santiago says they're coming.
Yeah, he's like, hey, this is going to be attacked, and he reads this through these. It's like
falcons fighting in the air. Yeah. So the elders say, okay, well, we will break the traditions and arm our men, but in 24 hours, if there's no blood spilt, it will be your blood spilt.
We're going to kill you.
Right.
If you're wrong.
Because
we're going to break our rule by allowing weapons in the oasis. Basically. So, excuse me. They tell him that he's going to die if he's wrong, essentially.
So this is when the alchemist makes himself known. He rides in on this horse, and the horse rears up, like he gallops up, and the horse rears up, and he like stands up and he says, "Who dares to read the flight of the birds, or the flight of the hawks?" And Santiago's like, "It was I who read the flight of the hawks." And he lands on his horse, and he pulls his sword, and he sticks his sword right on the tip of it, right on Santiago's forehead. Draws blood. Sitting there. Santiago just sort of stands his ground. He says, "It was I." He says this again. "It was I who read the flight of the hawks." And he says, "I had to test your courage." And then proceeds to take him under his wing, I guess.
Yeah.
And
no pun intended.
Yeah. Really a funny scene, because he's like this wild man, long hair, dressed in black. Not what I pictured when
very Arab warrior looking.
Yeah, not like an old mystical man with a beard, like a young, fit, dark-haired warrior who rides a dark horse and has falcons. Pretty cool character. So he basically is right. They come in the night, and they're all ready. They're all waiting for him. They put up this tent, and the tribesmen come in, and they attack this empty tent, and they just slaughter the bad guys. And part of this other thing is, if you're wrong, we kill you. But for every man that we slay, who you were right about, we'll give you a gold piece. So he gets like 50 gold pieces.
Yeah.
Which is like a ton of money, I guess.
Santiago does, yeah.
Yes, for being right. And having gained everybody's respect.
The elders of the Oasis told Santiago that upon him telling him that unknown armies were about to attack the Oasis.
That as long as you're right and we won't kill you, we'll actually pay you for every person
right.
who enters the tent that is here to cause trouble. So the alchemist decides to lead Santiago himself through the desert, because the war is not letting up, and it could last for years. Santiago reluctantly agrees because he wants to stay with Fatima. He's got all this gold now from his vision. He's kind of on the right path. He's learning to speak the language of the world, and yeah, he thinks Fatima is his treasure. But the alchemists convince him otherwise, and they set out on this like stealth mission. They're like sneaking through this warring territory, and eventually they almost get there. They almost get to the pyramids, but they're captured because they're in this hot zone, and they're brought to the Council of the Elders. And the alchemist just says, "Oh, you guys better be careful. I'm here leading my friend." And they're like, "Well, who's your friend?" And he says he's a powerful wizard. Basically, he's a powerful wizard. And in 3 days, he's going to turn himself into the wind. Santiago's like, "Excuse me?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know how to turn myself into the wind."
Yeah.
So it's kind of this weird, like, test, I guess, the alchemist puts him through. And the scene where he's learning how to do that, do you want to talk about how he has to talk to, like... All right, it's very strange because he starts out talking.
Yeah, I mean, he's
like he talk to the earth first, and then to the sun, or to the wind. First, he asks the wind, because he sort of has this weird relationship with the wind where he's able to like feel Fatima's kisses on the wind. But first he talks to the wind, and he asks the wind, "Can you turn me into the wind?" And the wind, he responds, he's able to speak to the wind, but he says, "I can't do that. You need to talk to the sun." And he goes and gets the sun for Santiago. And Santiago says, "You're so great, and can you turn me into the wind?" And he says, "As great as I am, for all these great things that I do, I cannot turn you into the wind. You need to talk to the soul of the earth." Is that right? And then it's back to the earth, and he's able to talk to like Mother Earth. Maybe this will be a good part to read because it's kind of complex. Are you there? Okay, no problem. So he gets to the soul of the earth. He's talking to like Gaia,
the soul of the world.
Soul of the world. Thank you. Which is like more than like, I guess not like Gaia, more like the universe, like this force that's been propelling him along, the whole way. How he was able to read the Flight of the Hawks. This is the language of the world, and now he's using it to speak to the soul of the world. I mean, maybe God. Maybe it's God at that point. And the soul of the world, David has something. Do you have something for it?
Yeah. Found a spot where he's talking to. Looks like he's talking to the sun here. So. Okay, here we go. Yeah. This is why alchemy exists, the boy said, so that everyone will search for his treasure, find it, and then want to be better than he was in his former life. Lead will play its role until the world has no further need for lead, and then lead will have to return itself to gold. That's what alchemists do. They show that when we strive to become better than we are, everything around us becomes better too. Well, why did you say that? I don't know about love, the son asked the boy. Because it's not love to be static like the desert, nor is it love to roam the world like the wind. And it's not love to see everything from a distance, like you do. Love is the force that transforms and improves the soul of the world. In that sentence, soul and world are capitalized. When I first reached through to it, I thought the soul of the world was perfect. But later I could see that it was just like other aspects of creation and had its own passions and wars. It is who we nourish the soul of the world, and the world we live in will be either better or worse, depending on whether we become better or worse. That's where the power of love comes in, because when we love, we always strive to become better than we are. So what do you want of me? The son asked. I want you to help me turn myself into the wind, the boy answered. Nature knows me as the wisest being in creation, the son said, but I don't know how to turn you into the wind. Then whom should I ask? The sun thought for a minute. The wind was listening closely and wanted to tell every corner of the world that the sun's wisdom had its limitations. that it was unable to deal with this boy who spoke the language of the world. "Speak to the hand that wrote all," said the sun. The wind screamed with delight and blew harder than ever. The tents were being blown from their ties to the earth, and the animals were being freed from their tethers. On the cliff, the men clutched at each other as they sought to keep from being blown away by the wind. The boy turned to the hand that wrote all. As he did so, he sensed that the universe had fallen silent, and he decided not to speak. A current of love rushed from his heart, and the boy began to pray. It was a prayer that he had never said before, because it was a prayer without words or pleas. His prayer didn't give thanks for his sheep having found new pastures. It didn't ask that the boy be able to sell more crystal, and it didn't beseech that the woman he had met continue to await his return. In the silence, the boy understood that the desert, the wind, and the sun were also trying to understand the signs written by the hand, and were seeking to follow their paths and to understand what had been written on a single emerald. He saw that the omens were scattered throughout the earth and in space, and that there was no reason or significance attached to their appearance. He could see that He could see that not the deserts, nor the winds, nor the sun, nor the people knew why they had been created, but that the hand had a reason for all of this, and that only the hand could perform miracles or transform the sea into a desert, or a man into the wind, because only the hand understood that it was a larger design that had moved the universe to a point at which 6 days of creation had evolved into a masterwork. The boy reached through to the soul of the world and saw that it was a part of the soul of God, and he saw that the soul of God was his own soul, and that he, a boy, could perform miracles.
And he does. He's transformed into the wind. It talks about this big storm, and Santiago's transported across the camp, basically, and a hurricane force winds, I guess, plenty to convince them that he does. It turned himself into the wind.
Yeah, it destroys camps.
Yeah, I mean, people are flying around. It's pretty crazy. So they let them go. They don't want to mess with this guy, right? So they're basically free to be in this territory, and the alchemist leads them to a spot not far from the pyramids. I think they can see them in the distance. He says they're about half an hour away, but he says, "I'm going to leave you now." Sends Santiago in, and he finds the spot, but instead of finding his treasure,
he finds a spot.
Yeah,
he starts digging.
Right, he finds what he thinks is the spot, based on what the soul of the world or the language of the world is telling him. He starts digging, and instead of finding the treasure, he finds some bandits, basically, and they rob and beat him badly. It's just not what I was expecting. And he says, "I'm here. I'm following my dream. I've had this dream. I'm looking for treasure." And as they're beating him and they're laughing at him, they're scoffing. The one bandit says to him, basically, "Dreams are foolish. I myself have had a recurring dream."
I'll read it.
Yeah.
He encounters. I'm just gonna read this whole scene right here. Another omen. The boy began to dig into the dune. As he did so, he thought of what the crystal merchant had once said, that anyone could build a pyramid in his backyard. The boy could see now that he couldn't do so if he placed stone upon stone for the rest of his life. Throughout the night, the boy dug at the place he had chosen, but found nothing. He felt weighted down by the centuries of time since a pyramid's been built, but he didn't stop. He struggled to continue digging as he fought the wind, which often blew the sand back into the excavation. His hands were abraded and exhausted, but he listened to his heart. It had told him to dig where his tears fell. It's heavy. As he attempted to pull out the rocks he encountered, He heard footsteps. Several figures approached him. Their backs were to the moonlight, and the boy could see neither their eyes nor their faces. "What are you doing here?" one of the figures demanded. Because he was fearful, the boy didn't answer. He had found where his treasure was and was frightened at what might happen. "We're refugees from the tribal wars and we need money," the other figure said. "What are you hiding here?" "I'm not hiding anything," the boy said. But one of them seized the boy and yanked him back out of the hole. Another, who was searching the boy's bags, found the piece of gold. "There's gold here," he said. The moon shone on the face of the Arab who had seized him, and in the man's eyes the boy saw death. "He's probably got more gold hidden in the ground." They made the boy continue digging, but he found nothing. As the sun rose, the men began to beat the boy. He was bruised and bleeding, his clothes were torn to shreds, and he felt that death was near. "What good is money to you if you're going to die? It's not often that money can save someone's life," the alchemist had said. And that's a reference back to the alchemist talking to him earlier. That's a memory he had. Finally, the boy screamed at the men, "I'm digging for treasure." And although his mouth was bleeding and swollen, he told his attackers that he had twice dreamed of a treasure hidden near the pyramids of Egypt. The man who appeared to be the leader of the group spoke to one of the others. "Leave him. He doesn't have anything else. He must have stolen this gold." The boy fell to the sand, nearly unconscious. The leader shook him and said, "We're leaving." But before they left, he came back to the boy and said, "You're not going to die. You'll live, and you'll learn that a man shouldn't be so stupid." 2 years ago, right here on this spot, I had a recurrent dream too. I dreamed that I should travel to the fields of Spain and look for a ruined church where shepherds and their sheep slept. In my dream, there was a sycamore growing out of the ruins of a sacristy. A sacristy. I don't know how to pronounce that word. And I was told that if I dug at the roots of the sycamore, I would find a hidden treasure. But I'm not so stupid as to cross an entire desert just because of a recurrent dream. And they disappeared. The boy stood up shakily and once more at the pyramids. They seemed to laugh at him, and he laughed back, his heart bursting with joy, because now he knew where his treasure was. And then there's an epilogue to the story, which is he goes back to the church that you mentioned at the beginning of this synopsis.
Where he takes his naps.
With his sheep.
And instead of taking a nap, he takes a shovel. That's a line from the book. And he digs, and not far in the ground, he finds this ornate chest filled with like Spanish galleons and gold. He's an incredibly wealthy man, and he can live out the rest of his days. Mentions he's going to go back to Fatima, whatever. Having
his beautiful wife
learned how to speak the language of the world, and having accomplished and fulfilled his own personal legend. And that is the story of the Alchemist. So I liked it. It was different than most of the stuff I read. Like I said, it almost felt like I was reading scripture. Like, it was so simple and just very metaphorical. It just was telling a story, but the whole purpose of it was to teach a lesson. And that lesson is, you must follow your dreams. You must do what you're sent here to do. And in that same idea, I guess it's a Christian idea that you have to use your talents because they're gifts. It's that same idea that everyone has a purpose when they arrive here, and that's to fulfill that personal legend, which ends up making them be the person they were meant to be. And that's the whole point of his journeys and his struggles, and why he had to go all the way there just to be beaten and have to go all the way back to where he started to find his treasure. Because it's not about the treasure, it's about that journey that he went on and learning to speak the way of the world. And so he was able to find it in the end. But I liked it. I mean, it was satisfying at the end when he learned he had to go back to where he began to find the treasure.
Yeah, it was an interesting book. I think you were the one that brought this up. You said, "Hey, we need to read this for the second podcast," and I was like, "Okay, I never heard of this before."
Yeah, my wife recommended it to me. and it's I see why it's so popular, because it leaves you with impressions. I would say that.
To say the least.
Yeah, it's not like last week we read The Sparrow by Mary Doria Russell, and it could not be more different, just in the style of writing, the tone.
Yeah, for sure, in the style of writing.
Positive.
There's definitely certain like themes that are similar, but
yes, definitely, a relationship with God is a theme that they share in common. But as far as the reading experience, so easy compared to The Sparrow.
it's
so
much
short.
easier. It's very
so
linear.
simple.
Yeah.
Linear timeline.
If you need a good uplifting...
There's like 4 characters,
Well, and there's one. Santiago is the main character you need to listen to.
The only one you need to worry about, really, and the Alchemist.
If you are looking for something easy, linear, just super easy to
uplifting.
Uplifting is a good point, because there's a lot of people. There's people I know that are going to listen to this that want something uplifting to read. This is a very simple, uplifting read that fits into a Christian worldview.
It is, but I like the way that he describes it, because he says the soul of the world, and he does say that he was seeing the soul of God, but it's not really a super religious book to me. It doesn't have to be interpreted that way.
Not religious,
right? No. It's about everybody's filling your own destiny. It's just in different words, following your own personal legend, filling your own destiny, listening to the language of the world. And I think that that's just, listening to yourself and your instincts, and learning to listen and learn from nature. And that's a lot of that's how Santiago learns. He learns from the nature.
This is completely anecdotal, but there's a line of thinking that says that because we are so inundated with technology and technological advancements, and just the way we live is just so separated from nature, that there are little hints that we just miss out on. Like I've heard that Native Americans, for instance, were able to look at the way that certain plants would lean throughout the season, and they could tell what was coming, what sort of weather was coming, just by the way a plant would face, and that's I'm doing a very bad job of describing this, but it's we don't have a relationship with the world around us anymore, because we're so glued to our phones, and which is a reason to read more books, because you do kind of separate yourself from technology a little bit, which technology is good, but too much of it's bad. And I think that
I feel like reading is this technology, though. It's like this ancient technology that allows you to play this movie in your head, and it's like but it's not bad for you. It doesn't have any of these.
You're picking apart hieroglyphs with your mind. You're taking the symbols that are on a piece of paper,
and translating them into this weird image.
Yeah.
This weird image that you can watch, so it stimulates your brain, but it's entertainment also.
Yeah.
And it is an entertainment form that I missed out on for a long time. I started out reading heavily as a child, a young child. Read big books for the sake of it, and I loved it. And I stopped reading anything but Harry Potter. I mean, I've reread those books 100,000 times, but
not bad.
I stopped reading anything but those. And this book and the last book we did, it makes me realize how many different ways there are to write a book. How many different ways that you can get a message across.
And read a book too.
And read a book, and what you can pull from it. And this was not about. It was a good story, but it's not about the plot. It's not about the images. It's not about the scenery. It's not even so much about the characters. It's about Santiago, but it's about the lessons and the morals that he wants you to take from it, which are follow your dreams. First and foremost, follow your dreams, and learn to connect with, I would say, nature, but it's more like the universe. It's more like your own self, because he says he looked in. Once he finds, finally, after he asks the desert, who points him to the sun, who points him to the soul of the world, and points him to the hand that wrote all. and he sees that the soul of God is his own soul. So there's this sort of we're all divinity idea. Like underneath all this sort of Christianity, there's this sort of idea that his own soul is the soul of God. So that's almost like a Buddhist idea where we're all just the same divine presence living itself through in a different thousand different ways. We're the same master soul.
That is a beautiful way to put it.
And they just kind of sort of throw that in at the end, but it's a very philosophical book. And I think Paulo Coelho, knowing about his history and what he's been through, to write something like this about following his own dreams and paths and his path in life to get to where he finally needed to be as an artist and a writer, after being deterred through all these years by his family and the government and all that other crazy stuff he went through, he did fulfill his own personal legend, and now he's, I'm sure, and I hope he's wealthy and happy, and he's written more books that are good sellers. And this book came at a time where, in a way, it's kind of easy, short, quick. Wasn't sure how much we were gonna have to talk about.
Yeah, we stressed about how long this was gonna be because we were like, "This is too."
And I mean,
too easy.
We'll get to an hour, but it is a short book. I read it in 2 sittings. I mean, you should read it. Ultimately, I think you should read it if you're listening, because it's easy enough to read that you'll get a lot out of it for doing it, compared to the effort it takes. But it resonated with me a lot in more ways than just the story and the characters. We just started this podcast. This is our 2nd episode, and this idea of following your own personal legend and doing what needs to be done, and just to keep going to achieve whatever it is that satisfies you, and we've been talking about doing this podcast for a long time.
Years.
Yeah, I mean, like 3-4 years now, and the fact that it's kind of coming to fruition and that we can read this book, and it, honestly, to me, was just like motivation. It's just what I needed to hear.
Yeah.
So I think it was a good read for our 2nd podcast.
For sure. Yeah, this is a book like The Sparrow is a book I recommend to everybody, but this is a book that everybody can read. The Sparrow gets a little too dark for some people, I think.
Mm-hmm.
This book definitely does not.
And it doesn't even take a lot of time. If you're gonna watch a few episodes of something, you could read this book instead.
Yeah.
And I'm not surprised it sold 50,000 copies, because there's a review on the back of the book, and maybe you could hand it to me or look at it, where it says something to the effect of reading the book is like watching the sunrise, or something. I'll find it here. I know it's somewhere close. Okay, we'll see. Let's see. Wow, there's like a lot of critical praise for this book. Well, it's gonna take me a minute here.
The critics actually, this is not a critical darling. Critics didn't like this as much.
And I'm not surprised, because it comes across as really simple.
It's no Hemingway. It's no,
Yeah.
It's no Kerouac. It's no McCarthy. But it's very simple. But it's a fable, basically, essentially.
Man, I swear it was like right here. Anyway, I think that's what he says. He says reading this book is like sitting outside and watching the sunrise. It's like connecting with nature, and it did put me in mind of this very simple time in the past. He's just a shepherd. He doesn't have these stresses and these worries, but he still feels like he has this mission to fulfill, this purpose to achieve, and there's a lot more to the book than maybe it comes across as. So give it a chance, and I hope that you guys learned enough about it to be intrigued. we picked this book because it is a quick and easy read, and we're doing Stephen King's It next.
Oh yeah, that'll be a few weeks from now.
And it is 1,100 pages.
Over 1,100.
And we read the 500-page Sparrow last, so we're gonna have to figure out a way to mix it up, because we are reading these books right before we do these podcasts, and we're doing that for you guys that are listening. So please keep listening.
Hit the subscribe button down below.
Thank you for making it through this one. If you're here on YouTube, please like us. Please subscribe. That's the big one, subscribing. And leave us a comment. Yeah. We are on SoundCloud.
Instagram, Pontification Nation.
This has been Pontification Nation, Episode 2, The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. And I've been Dallin Wilson.
And I have been David Pryor.
That's right. Am. And I think we'll still be those people next time.
All right. Thanks, folks.
Thanks, guys. And we're done. Out.